Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to another edition of Bigfoots Pad Paranormal Radio. On the phone tonight with me is Nick, also known as Mothman Warrior, and I'm King Sasquatch. And tonight's show is an interview with Nick Redfern. He is an author of many books. He's been on TV. He's most popular for his monster, cryptozoology, and crashed UFOs and UFO writings. What do you think of tonight's show, Nick?
I think tonight's going to be pretty exciting. Talking to Mr. Redfern should definitely be a treat. You know, we've talked to a couple of other experts in the history of our show, and those were very good as well. So I think tonight will be a repeat of what we've had in the past.
Good. So, right now waiting for Nick to call in. I told him to call in a couple minutes after the show. So
Yeah, I'm just looking at a few of his books. They actually look pretty interesting. Before you scheduled this interview, I wasn't familiar with him, but I see he has quite an extensive list of works. Let us well get that in before the interview starts. But I'm looking at all his works, and it's just, I didn't know he wrote this many books. I know he wrote a couple books, but there's quite a set. But again, his area of expertise is right up our alley.
yeah. Right now I'm just writing in the chat room.
Oh, all right.
I know he should be calling in here in just a minute.
Oh, yeah.
Anyways,
But
well, I know next week we're trying to get Jeff Wamsley to do an interview with us. I don't know if you guys know who Jeff Wamsley is. He's a Mothman researcher and author. He's the owner of the Mothman Museum in Point Pleasant. That's been pretty good. Well, we have a couple of really good interviews lined up. We've been talking back and forth with a couple of random celebrities. Right, Nick?
yeah.
Gary.
Yeah, we've been talking to Gary. Yeah, we're gonna get Metallica to come on the show.
Well, I know we have Autumn Williams said she wanted to do an interview back coming in June or July. We have something scheduled with her, but should be pretty good.
Yeah.
Patrick Childress, he's going to talk about his latest Sasquatch and Yeti expedition. I guess he just got back recently.
Isn't that the guy that went to Tibet, you said, or is that somebody else?
That's him.
Oh, that's him. Oh, yeah, that definitely should be interesting if he tells us about his expedition in Tibet and see if he found anything.
Mm-hmm. Switchboard going all crazy.
Well, I have some paranormal news. If you don't mind me sharing it with the listeners there, you want me to?
You should be
all
calling
right.
them. So you could say a quick.
All right. Okay. I just figured I found this very. What the heck? I found this very random story, and apparently I'm having technical difficulties trying to pull it up. Oh wait, I found another. Huge flying creature sightings in Pennsylvania. Dated from June 2008. This man named Stan Gordon said, "This past February, I wrote about a man who reported a very close observation of a giant bird in neighboring West Virginia in late September or early October 2007. Before Before I go any further, a big giant bird sighting in West Virginia.
Wonder what that could be.
Wonder what it could be. Yeah.
1 second. And 817, you're on the line.
This is Nick.
Oh,
hello.
How are you doing, Nick?
I'm doing good, thanks. How's it
Doing
going?
good, Mr. Redfern.
Good. Cool.
Yeah, well, we're actually just saying, Nick was talking about that there was some giant bird sightings back in West Virginia that he was telling some callers that were asking us some questions. But anyways, we're going to start the show since our guest, Nick Redfern, called in. I was going to say, could you talk a little bit about yourself and just some of the things that got you into cryptozoology and paranormal?
Yeah, sure.
And then after that, we'll branch off into some specific little topics.
Yeah, no problem. Well, when I finished at school, I started working on a rock music magazine back in England called Zero, and I did that for a few years, that kind of got me involved in sort of mainstream journalism, doing feature writing, interviews, that sort of thing, for the mainstream press. But I'd had an interest going back quite a while in, I guess, weird subjects, cryptozoology, paranormal, etc. When I was about 5 or 6 years old, I went with my parents for a week's holiday to Scotland, and we spent one day at Loch Ness. And my dad told me this story, about the Loch Ness Monster and what it was, or the theories, that it was some sort of surviving dinosaur or something like that, or a colony of just unidentified animals. And, even at that age, I guess, when you're like a little kid, the imagination kind of grips you as to, wow, there's monsters in this huge, mysterious-looking lake. And I suppose, when I was sort of 9, 10 onwards, I began reading books about the subject, and as I got into my teens, began subscribing to some of the few newsletters and magazines that were around back then. And then, as I'd been doing the journalism for a few years, I thought, well, why don't I try and, combine the two and do sort of like investigative journalism, but focusing on weird stuff, and that's kind of what I did, really. So I guess it's, it goes back to that sort of that time, we go into Loch Ness.
Yeah. Well, another thing I was wondering was, it said on your website that you write for a magazine or a blog now?
Well, I've got quite a few blogs on different subjects: UFOs, cryptozoology, Bigfoot, cryptozoology in general. I've got a Bigfoot one. I've got about 9 or 10 different blogs altogether, all on different subjects. And I've been doing that for sort of about 4 or 5 years, maybe. Yeah, with the blogs, it's I kind of like blogs because it's sort of like an immediate thing where you can kind of update, daily, get comments back, rather than a website, which is more like a static thing just to, promote who the person is, I guess. So.
Well, we have a bunch of questions that we wrote down that people were sending us since we announced we were going to have an interview with you. And the way we broke them down is we wrote some of your book names, and then we wrote the questions people were writing us that had to do with the book, like the specific. So what we're going to have a cryptid section, like aliens section. Then we're going to go to like personal questions for you, and then we just had other random questions. Didn't really fit in any of those. Well, we're going to start off with your book called "There's Something in the Woods." Could you explain a little bit what the book's about and just what you guys investigated and all that sort of thing?
Yeah, basically, There's Something in the Woods is written like a lot of my cryptozoology books are written, which is sort of in a road trip style. And I don't do that deliberately. It's just that, with cryptozoology, it is pretty much, the investigations are like road trip because you're going out into the woods or the lakes, the mountains, whatever, to do an investigation. So, when you're writing it up, you need to sort of reflect what happened to get across to the reader, the nature of the investigation. And as you can, I'm sure most listeners can tell, I'm not originally from the US, originally from England. And in end of 2005, me and my wife went back to the UK to live for about a year. And so this book is primarily sort of chronicles the time when we travelled over to England and then came back to the US, and it covers a lot of my investigations into things like lake monster reports in Britain, werewolf sightings, Bigfoot type reports, big cats on the loose, and then when we came back to the US, investigations into things like Mothman type reports, werewolves and Bigfoot over here as well, and a few other things. So it's kind of like a transatlantic excursion, you know, looking for different types of weird creatures in the two different respective countries, I guess.
Oh, Jared, may I ask Mr. Redfern a question quick?
Yeah, just feel free whenever you have a question.
Oh, okay. Mr. Redfern, this is more in your neck of the woods. Are you familiar with the legend of Spring-Heeled Jack?
Yes, I am, yeah. Yeah, Spring-Heeled Jack's a weird story. It dates back, you know, a century or more ago now, and Spring-Heeled Jack basically was this sort of shadowy, cloaked figure that was seen in and around London in the 19th century. And actually are some reports suggesting the phenomenon goes back much further. And Spring-Heeled Jack has been portrayed by some people as kind of like a sinister but human figure, you know, running around London terrorizing people at night, like something straight out of like a gothic horror novel. Other people kind of seem almost as like a wraith type character, a supernatural being that's, you know, almost like a Grim Reaper, I guess. And he reportedly had these sort of weird paranormal powers that people would say they would see him sort of leaping from rooftop to rooftop at fantastic speeds. And, you know, this has sort of created in some people's minds, at least, the idea of, you know, like a large bat-like creature, not dissimilar to the Mothman. But as I said, other people take the view that he was more like a sinister Jack the Ripper type character. And so, you know, it sort of splits the research community. But Spring-Heeled Jack is like a long-lasting legend in and around London. And, you know, even today you can find people who have claimed up-to-date sightings of, you know, these creatures or this being, not being aware of the original legends, but then when they tell it to someone, you know, it becomes clear that they're talking about Spring-Heeled Jack. So the very fact that the sightings have gone on for so long, you know, again, that's something that leads people to believe it has to be paranormal. You know, you're not going to have somebody running around, you know, the little back streets of London in the dead of night for 2 centuries, you know. So
I know that people reported that the sightings mostly happened in the early 1900s and 1800s, but does it happen in more recent times? Like, have you heard of anything more recent? Or?
I've heard of a few reports, but I mean, they're basically all along the lines of...
Like with Spring-Heeled Jack?
Yeah, of somebody sort of walking home late one night in London, particularly in the very old parts of London, and saying, you know, they saw this shadow...
I think the phone line's getting really silent. Hey, Nick, I think your phone line's getting really quiet all of a sudden. I know Nick Redfern, his phone just cut out, I think, or it got really silent.
That's funny. I can hear you okay this end. Can you hear me at all?
I can hear you, but it sounds like you're really far away.
Oh. Well, hang on, let me just...
Now we're back to normal. That was weird. It went really silent. Now it's back to normal again.
I guess it's the Men in Black.
But what were you saying?
Yeah.
Was that the modern sightings of
maybe it was Spring-Heeled Jack, who knows? But, yeah, Spring-Heeled Jack, there have been reports from recent years, particularly in some of the older parts of London, where people have said, you know, they've been walking home very late at night, and suddenly they've looked up and saw this cloaked figure racing at high speed along the old rooftops and, you know, leaping from building to building, which sounds just like Spring-Heeled Jack. Now, there certainly aren't anywhere near the number of reports that there were, say, you know, 100 and something years ago. But whatever this thing is, you know, occasionally we get reports suggesting it's still out there.
So going back to your book, There's Something in the Woods, we have a bunch of questions about the Terror in the Trailer chapter.
Oh, yeah.
I haven't read that book myself, but I was wondering, is there any way you could explain a little bit about the creature or whatever was happening around your...
Yeah, this basically revolves around a little town about a 40-minute drive outside of Fort Worth, west of Fort Worth, Texas. And Paradise is sort of like a very isolated small town with a lot of woodland and fields and not much else really. So it's, sort of a very wild area. And I investigated a story or an incident which had occurred there a number of years earlier, where a farmer woke up early one morning to find one of his cows literally sort of torn apart. Not like a wild animal would attack an animal, and a cow and eat the leg or whatever, but it was just as if something viciously had just killed the animal for the sake of killing it, just torn it apart and left the body parts just strewn everywhere, apart from, I think it was the back legs which were missing. And of course the rancher was very concerned because, farming was his livelihood. And so he stayed up several nights, looking for this, whatever the creature was, in case it came back and attacked some of his other cattle. Now, as he told me, his first thought was, well, could it be like a large, big cat on the loose, like a mountain lion, or worse still, something that had escaped from a private zoo or a circus, like a fully grown lion or tiger. So he stayed up several nights, and I think it was on the third night that he said that he was looking through his night scope equipment. He was actually a hunter as well, so he got all the hunting gear, and said he saw this creature which, the best way he could describe it, the body was kind of like you might describe in Bigfoot, like man-like but hairy, but the head was like that of a German shepherd, like pointed ears and a long pointed muzzle, which sort of gave it, I guess, like a werewolf flavour to the story. And of course, like a lot of people, instead of firing his gun, he just froze. It was like if you witness a car accident, people just freeze sometimes with shock.
Yeah.
And that's what he did. But the weird thing was that when he went down to the field, I think it was the day afterwards, he found like a small carved stone head in the field, which had like these vicious-looking fangs and elongated eyes, etc. And his conclusion was that somebody had been kind of undertaking some sort of ancient rite or ritual, and had literally conjured up some sort of creature that looked like an animal, but that was, something far different for anything that exists normally in our world. And he was actually very frightened by the whole situation, and just wanted to try and put it behind him, really. And it never happened again. It hadn't happened before, but it was just one of these things that, one of these odd stories that sort of come my way sometimes, where some of these creatures we're looking for, I think, are either sort of less or more than flesh and blood. There's a different aspect to some of these things.
And also, we have a couple of questions regarding it. People were asking, so when you were doing that whole situation with the farmer in Texas, did it last only a couple of days, or was this over a couple of years time period? Or?
Oh, no. His experience was just this one-time thing, where the cow was killed on the one day, and I think it was 3 days afterwards that he saw the thing sort of striding across the field in like 3 a.m. or something like that. And then the day after that, he found the stone head, and that was it. Whatever this thing was never came back. Now, we could speculate that the thing didn't come back because he got rid of the head. He actually gave it to me. You could argue that had something to do with it. Maybe the head had... What's that, sorry?
Oh, I said, do you still have the head?
No, I don't. Actually, I gave that to another colleague who was sort of more expert in the field of werewolves, but there is a photograph of it in the book, which is reproduced quite well, and you can see all the stone and the carvings on it. But, you could argue, I suppose, that the head had to be present for the creature to sort of manifest and appear. That's one possibility. But I can say that in the time that I had it, nothing weird happened here. So that's admittedly, that's sort of a grey area.
Yeah. We also had another question. You said your wife went with you.
Yeah.
What does she think about all this? Does she think it's crazy, or does she just?
Oh no, she doesn't think it's crazy. She doesn't think it's crazy. She thinks there's genuine weird stuff going on, but she's just not interested in it, which is fine because we have our own social life, we do our own thing, and then she has her hobbies and I have mine. So I think that's good that you share things, and it's healthy that you have your own things as well. So when she might be watching American Idol one night. I'm kind of on the phone to somebody telling me where they saw a lake monster or whatever. So.
I was just saying because we look for Bigfoot and all that over here near Oregon and all that, and we can't even convince any of our girlfriends or anything to go with us.
No, I think it's one of these things where I don't think it's a male versus female thing. I think it's whether, just whether or not people are interested in it. I think that's all it really comes down to. I think the paranormal, supernatural, cryptozoology, UFOs, it's something that you either are interested in or you're not. It's not something you can kind of force yourself to become interested in, I think.
And we have what were you going to say, Nick? Oh, sorry. The guy from my team is off with me. Sorry.
I was just going to further comment on Mr. Redfern's story. I found some information about a certain N.Q. Patterson, and it talks about this man that suffered from tuberculosis, and he carved these figures that sounded much like the one you described, Mr. Redfern. Are you familiar with this at all?
What's his name again?
N.Q. Patterson. I found a place that says the legend. Oh no, the face of the Bear Creek Beast.
Huh. No.
And in this legend, it says there was a guy who made these carvings that became very famous around. He's a Tennessee transplant to Texas, and he lived in the hill. Oh, yeah, and just says he lived in the hill country, and he was a tombstone carver. But I just thought it was an interesting connection to your own experience. It maybe even offers more validity. I think it offers a great deal of validity to your case.
Yeah, I'll have to look into that one more. I hadn't heard about that. And we have some questions coming in right now on your book called Memoirs of a Monster Hunter.
Uh-huh.
And people were asking, you have a chapter on living dinosaurs, and right now we have a guy that's asking, where primarily are they sighted? And besides the ones that you mostly hear of in the Congo and New Guinea, is there any of them that are in other places, or is it mostly those areas? Or?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the other aspects of cryptozoology. Sometimes we're looking for unknown animals, and sometimes it sounds like the witnesses are describing what sound just like, as you said, surviving dinosaurs. Now, there are several locations. For example, down on the Texas-Mexico border, we get a lot of reports of creatures that sound very much like pterodactyls. They're not described as being like giant birds, but they're literally described as kind of like a large, leathery, bat-like creature, which does sound very much like, the ancient pterodactyls, which of course, should not be alive today. They're presumed to become extinct. So we get reports like that from up there. Now, also, at least as far back as the 1800s, there were a very few number, not many, but there were a few reports from the more remote parts of Alaska, and particularly Siberia, of people who claim to have seen very small pockets of surviving mammoths. Now, that's it's pretty controversial, the idea that the mammoth could have existed into modern times, but in very isolated and small numbers. And obviously, it almost certainly would be extinct today. But there are stories like that from at least 100 years, up to 100 years ago, that seem to have some sort of credence to them. And people talk about the Loch Ness Monster, could they be surviving plesiosaurs? So, I don't think we can rule out the idea. There's also another creature in Australia known as Megalania, and which is described as being a large lizard-like creature, or like a dinosaur, but in all probability, from the witness reports, it sounds like this creature, Megalania, which was a giant monitor lizard, which again was presumed to become extinct, long time ago, and that possibly, again, in some of the, the more dense parts of Australia, it could just about, in theory, have survived. So, I don't rule out the idea that some of the things we think have become extinct might not be so extinct after all.
And also, we have people that are asking, how often are the living dinosaurs or things that are similar to that, how often are they seen?
Well, I mean, one of the problems, of course, is that the places where these creatures have been seen are sort of often very remote. You know, we're talking about deep in the African jungles or the South American rainforests, and you know, other than the tribes that live there, the only time, you know, anyone else really goes is people who are on the expeditions looking for these things. So in other words, the sightings actually aren't that common, purely and simply because, you know, if no one's looking for them, no one's going to see them, and the tribesmen have no interest in really reporting it because they see no need to. So that's what makes it difficult. You know, it's like if dinosaurs were living, you know, 2 miles from New York State or whatever, people would see them, but that's obviously not what's happening. So the number of sightings really is based around the geography and the number of people that live there, or the lack of people that live there, I suppose.
And we also have some more questions. People said that you, in your Memoirs of a Monster Hunter, you talked about gargoyles and goatmen. They were saying, are the goatmen similar to Sasquatch, or are they their own creatures?
No, not really. The goatmen are, again, more of like a paranormal type creature. There's goatmen legends from Maryland, Kentucky, several from Texas, Michigan, lots of other places, and they literally are described, as the name suggests, very much like creatures straight out of like ancient Greek and Roman mythology, like cloven-hoofed creatures with horns. That, you know,
they're like demonic type entities?
Yeah, almost like a demonic type creature, but because of the cloven hoofs and the horns, people sort of associated them less with devils and demons, but more with like the satires of ancient mythology, something along those lines. And these, you know, these beings, these creatures, whatever they are, there have been reports of them sort of appearing and vanishing in the flash of an eye, and, you know, sort of haunting the same areas over and over again. There's a lot of goatman legends in the US particularly, where these creatures seem more prevalent in the vicinity of ancient bridges. You know, they seem to haunt the bridges. So in that respect, I think in these cases we're not dealing with something like an unknown animal or a surviving dinosaur. I think this is more of the paranormal aspect of cryptozoology rather than the flesh and blood one.
Would you say that gargoyles are in the same category, or do you think that those are more of like a flesh and blood creature?
No, I put those in the same category. I've investigated several gargoyle-type reports, one from West Texas, a case from the 1940s, several from England, and they all seem to have sort of a weird paranormal aspect to them, which, you know, when you get just one aspect of the paranormal involved with, you know, with things like this, it kind of tends to point in to suggest that that is the right direction to go in. So, you know, I think the idea that there could be large man-like creatures, you know, with wings flying around the countryside is unlikely if they're physical animals. I think it is more likely that, you know, they're paranormal as well.
Well, we're going to move on to your other book called Three Men Seeking Monsters. That one, I have read some of that one. Yes, I was wondering, and a couple other people were sending these in. When you guys initially left, it said you traveled around England and parts of the United States looking for monsters, it said. Were you initially looking for certain creatures, or did you just set out and look just in strange areas, or?
Not really. Basically what it was, that was sort of like a 6-week expedition that we went on about 10 years ago before I moved over to the US. And what it basically was that all of us had various cases and witnesses that we'd never really followed up on to any great extent. And it actually sort of transpired that my planned move to the US coincided where all three of us had quite a bit of time on our hands. So we thought, well, you know, we've got all these leads that we've never really followed up on. Why don't we try and do them all in one go? And that's basically what it was. So it wasn't a case of us saying we were going to investigate Bigfoot or a lake monster. It was sort of more dictated by the cases that we had on file that we never really looked into. And, it was sort of a cross-section of pretty much everything, really. And that included a gargoyle report.
So on the question we're getting right now on our chat room, they're asking, what kind of creatures did you see when you were on your trip?
Well, I mean, for the most part, it was us interviewing witnesses. You know, it wasn't, unfortunately, for the most part, our own experiences. But, you know, we spoke to, for example, one man who had been sort of greatly disturbed by what he said was like a sighting or a series of sightings of a very much like a gargoyle-type creature in the town of Glastonbury in England, which is a very ancient town, sort of magical town that's linked with King Arthur and all sorts of other legends. And he felt that he'd been dabbling in sort of occult matters, and he felt he'd opened some sort of doorway to allow this creature in, I suppose. And he felt it was persecuting him almost. And that was sort of a weird story, but that revolved around a gargoyle. There are other people, for example, who told us stories about seeing Bigfoot-like creatures in the woods of England and Scotland particularly. Big cats on the loose. Now, of course, you know, there's no indigenous big cats in Britain at all, or at least there shouldn't be. Yeah. But people see these things, and, you know, there's lots of theories as to how they could exist. You know, could they be exotic pets escaped from zoos and things like that? So there was a lot of those investigations, and also a very weird one of someone who'd seen like a large worm-type creature, like a big, large, writhing, coiling worm in the county of Wiltshire, and it was supposedly traced back to like an extensive underground tunnel system where it was felt these, or the theory was that that's where these creatures lived. They were like a deep underground creature that, you know, science hadn't found yet. So it's like a really weird cross-section of different animals, I suppose.
Didn't you have a story or something on that recently, Mothman? The
Mothman?
Oh, no, I was referring to my team member as Mothman.
Oh.
You guys have the same name, so I was just...
Oh, no, I was just looking at I was just reading about Mr. Redfern's Body Snatchers in the Deserts book. And that, do you want to hold that off later till the show, though, Jer?
I have a couple more questions on other books.
All right, yeah, go ahead, continue with your questions.
Yeah, regarding your trip that you took on your 3 Men Seeking Monsters, what would you say was one of your favorite parts of the trip, or what's something that you look forward to on trips like that?
Oh, well, you know, I mean, in terms of that one, I think the most memorable one was the gargoyle investigation, because that was so sort of eerie and weird in terms of the witness's account. You know, he was a very frightened man, and, you know, basically he sort of rued the day that he opened this door and let this thing in, as he kind of termed it, and, you know, he just wanted it out of his life. And, you know, to see this guy literally sort of shaking and sweating, that the fact that, you know, he was seeing this shadowy creature watching him, etc., that was sort of, for me, the most memorable one. But, you know, in terms of, as you said about what do I look forward to in general, I guess, you know, it's the idea of getting on the road and hopefully, you know, if you spend a week or more in one location, it's the potential, at least, of possibly hoping that we can one day solve these cases. And I think, particularly with cryptozoology, you know, the internet is a great tool for resource material, but if you want to find Bigfoot, you know, you're not going to find it on the internet. You've got to get out and look for it, and, you know, that's what I enjoy doing, is sort of, you know, going out and trying to find these things.
And regarding your statement you said a minute ago that Bigfoot or Bigfoot-like creatures over in England, I was reading some excerpts from your book Man Monkey, and I don't really know a lot about that. And I was just wondering, is it any different from like the Sasquatch creatures you would hear about in the U.S. or anything?
Yeah, a lot of people in England don't know anything about it either. But, yeah, I mean, everybody, I guess, when you talk about weird creatures in England, you know, everybody knows about the Loch Ness Monster and the big cat reports. What a lot of people don't know is that Britain has a long history of like Bigfoot-type creatures, hairy wild men, strange-looking ape-like creatures, primarily in some of the larger forests and particularly in the larger mountain ranges in Scotland. But there's one that's become known as the man monkey, which was first seen in the 1800s, interestingly enough, at a canal bridge, which is where a lot of the Goatman sightings are made, an ancient canal bridge in central England in a large sort of forested area, actually only about 7 miles from where I grew up. So in other words, I sort of knew this legend and story, from when I was a kid. And so when I kind of got interested in all this, I'd listen out every time, the local newspapers would report on somebody had seen this large ape-like creature running across the road, this bridge, scaring the life out of them. And when I began working as a journalist, I did some writing for a local newspaper, and I wrote an article about it and said, if anybody knows anything about it, can they contact me? And I was surprised when I got somewhere in the region of probably 15 or 16 letters and phone calls. This was sort of pre-email era for the most part, sort of early 90s, early to mid-90s. And I began to realise that instead of just the one or two initial reports from the 1800s that everybody presumed were the only ones that existed, that there are actually a lot more. And all the people were describing what didn't sound like, like a 7 foot, 8 foot tall, sort of lumbering Bigfoot type creature that we have over here, but it was more like a large, slim chimpanzee type creature, but with glowing eyes, which again, sort of has a paranormal quality. And over the years, I got enough reports together to put it into like a small book. It's, it's not one of the biggest books I've written because the information's limited, so you can only go with what you can work with. But I found enough material to suggest that, this man-monkey is a real thing. Again, whether it's like a colony of flesh and blood animals or some sort of like a spooky, spectral thing that haunts the bridge is sort of open to debate, but there's definitely something going on there.
So, are you one of the only investigators that investigates that, or is there a wide field of people that look for it, or...?
Not really. I mean, the reason the story surfaced was because it was actually written about in an old book in 1883 by an author called Charlotte Byrne. And she was really the only person to look into it until about 1980 when husband and wife team, Janet and Colin Board, they wrote briefly about it in a book called Alien Animals. But really, until I wrote my book, nobody had ever delved into it to any great extent before that. And I think, like me, I think it was primarily because people didn't realise there were additional witnesses out there right up to the present day who had, interesting stories to tell. So I think it's really only when people dig into it that they find that there's a bigger story, and then they research it more. It's like a spiral, I guess. It takes like on a life of its own. But but I might update the book one day because there's more information come through since it was published in 2007, which adds more to the story. So.
Well, since you wrote the book, do you get a lot more reports on it, or is it about the same? Or?
Not a lot more. I would say maybe 2 or 3. One of the most interesting things that did surface was that a fellow researcher named Mike Dash found an old newspaper report from the 1800s, which talked about a gorilla supposedly escaping from a travelling circus in the area. Now, that might actually explain the original sighting. The problem is, of course, it wouldn't explain the modern-day sighting unless, you hold to the idea that the gorilla died. And what people are seeing today is its spectral form still haunting the area where it died. And, and who knows, people talk about human ghosts haunting houses. Who's to say an animal ghost couldn't haunt the area where it briefly lived and then died, after its escape? So, that's kind of an interesting little theory, I think, that there could have been a real flesh and blood gorilla on the loose, very brief, maybe for a week or two, and that because of the harsh, cold English winter, this is actually December when the sighting occurred, it died, and then, its spectral form's still roaming around. So.
Mm-hmm. We have a caller from a 970 area code, and 970, you're on the air.
Mr. Nick Redfern, how are you, sir? J.C. Johnson.
Oh, hey, J.C., how's it going?
Awesome. How are you?
I'm doing good, thanks.
I was just perusing my MySpace, and I saw that you were going to be on Bigfoot Pad Paranormal. And I'm like, hey, go say hi to Nick. It's not often we get to talk.
No, it's been a while.
It has. Your new book, Abductees. Wow. Contactees, yes. Getting all kinds of stuff back on that. Amazing.
Oh, well, thanks. I try to, focus on an area of the UFO subject that I suppose hadn't really been touched on for a long time. There was so much focus on abductions and Area 51 and things like that, that I thought, you know, it'd be kind of nice to bring to a newer audience some of the older, forgotten stories from the past.
You know, and some of the people you talked to fairly recently also, I remember I sent you a link to UFOs, the Demonic Deception.
Oh, yeah, uh-huh.
And you got right back to me. It said, you know, I've been talking to these guys, and they don't know what we're really dealing with, and that's covered in the book. So,
yeah, I've got a book
out there.
I've got a book actually coming out a new book coming out in about 2 months called Final Events, which is actually a study of the whole theory that UFOs could have like occult origins rather than ET origins. And the book is basically a study of a group inside the government that looked like a think tank group that looked at the UFO subject and concluded that what we believe are aliens, it's like some sort of demonic deception. Now, you know, what I'm telling people in the book is that, you know, I don't know what the truth is. All I can say is that this is what the people in the government believe, and they concluded. You know, so it puts like another spin on the subject as well.
Once again, we will go back to the subject. If even 1% of what we believe is going on up on Archuleta Mesa, it's very disturbing.
Oh,
that's right here in my backyard.
Yeah, lots of things, you know, where people think it's all just flesh and blood, weird creatures and nuts and bolts UFOs. It gets into some weird, esoteric, paranormal aspects when you sort of dig into it deeper. And in some respects, you know, you see parallels and tie-ins between the two subjects even.
Have you done any research on Archuleta Mesa?
You know, I actually haven't, but one of the main reasons I haven't, I guess, one is distance, and the other one is that, you know, there are a lot of other people who've done a lot of good research anyway and are sort of far more expert and well-versed in that field anyway, without me sort of lumbering in and, you know, having to start from the beginning again, so to speak.
Well, you know, when I was up there, they had the Dulce conference, and that morning, like 3 Block helicopters flew down Main Street. Loud, very loud. And I got up there, and Norio Hayakawa, dear friend of ours, is the one who put together the conference. I ran into several of your friends there.
Okay, good.
That were talking about you. David Hatcher Childress was there, and Chris O'Brien. And he's done a lot of work near the Archuleta Mesa, but over on the other side, the Colorado side. So interesting things. Very interesting.
I've been there a couple of times. I spoke at Angel Fire once at a conference, and so got out to the area. And you know, it's an interesting, weird place. You know, and it's good that there are people who are, you know, digging into it. So.
One of the things
you had a couple.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I was going to say, we had a couple of questions about your contactees book actually come up when you were talking about it. People were asking, does it happen in any certain areas more frequently than it does in others?
Well, I mean, definitely in the 1950s, when the phenomenon sort of really kicked off, that a lot of sightings contactee encounters occurred out in the deserts of California, sort of the remoter areas, you know, like a couple of hours outside of LA when you're sort of getting deep into the desert. And for people who aren't sort of fully aware, the contactees were people who, again, pretty much kicking off in the early 50s, claimed face-to-face encounters with very human-like aliens out in remote locations like deserts, forests, hilltops, where the aliens would reportedly talk about, you know, the perils of nuclear war and things like that, and, you know, environmental destruction. But yeah, definitely in the 50s, California was a big area. But I mean, since then there's been reports from, you know, pretty much all over the world, and definitely a lot from South America as well, like Argentina and Brazil and places like that.
We had another guy I was asking, on your opinion, why do you think that they came to these people? Like the people that they actually came to?
Well, I mean, that's a question I always get asked, and it's a good question. You know, people say, well, why don't they just land on the White House lawn if they're worried about our warlike ways or whatever? my personal opinion, and it is just an opinion, that's all it can be until we know the answer, is that possibly some of these beings, recognize that maybe governments are going to be hostile to them, and so to get their message across, but to avoid, I guess having people in government trying to hunt them down, that they approach people at random who they hope can kind of act as like a message or a voice, a mouthpiece for them to get their message out, but where they can stay in the background. So it's almost like a shadowy manipulation rather than an outright landing, which they could do, but obviously they haven't, because, we wouldn't be talking about it now if they had. So I think it's something like that. It's more along the lines of a tentative approach rather than, showing themselves sort of worldwide and blowing our minds and risking, us becoming over-reliant on them, which could happen. That often happens when a far more advanced society mixes with a less advanced one, that the less advanced one gets swallowed up by the more superior culture. So I think, that's something that might have suggested why they don't show themselves too much.
And we had another guy that was asking, what's your favorite story that you've heard from one of these contactees, or one of the most interesting in your point of view? Like, what do you think?
Oh, in my view, the most interesting one is a man named Truman Bethurum. Truman Bethurum was a 1950s contactee who claimed repeated experiences at a place called Mormon Mesa, which is this large, huge mesa in Nevada, a few hours outside of Las Vegas. And he claimed contact with very human-like aliens, and he said supposedly that they were kind of led, if you like, by a beautiful space woman that gave the name of Aura Raines. And his story is an entertainingly weird story that comes across like a cross between Star Trek meets Baywatch or something like that. And
well, just wondering, you said it was outside of Vegas. We actually all live in Vegas. Was it north of Vegas, or?
I'll have to check now. I forget where it is, but it's called Mormon Mesa. It's like a huge, ancient mesa. It's got fossils on it from the prehistoric era and all sorts of things. But if you Google Mormon Mesa, it's even on Wikipedia. You'll find it there. And he claimed these experiences there. But what fascinates me more than anything else is that the experiences sound almost like they occurred in, I guess, like an altered state of mind, where he had some sort of interaction with like an ethereal intelligence, some sort of ethereal being, rather than a literal flesh and blood space woman, if you like, which that kind of gives it more like a cartoonish sci-fi image, but it was actually more like a magical, occult type meeting where, this ethereal being would manifest and, and then it would sort of talk in kind of almost like guarded tones, and then would sort of vanish into the night and appear again. It did have sort of this strange otherworldly aspect to it, and Bethurum's story is one of the most entertainingly weird ones.
And we have a bunch of questions, well, so do I too, about the body snatchers in the desert book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's probably the most controversial book I've ever written, and one that practically had people throwing stones at me at times.
Well, I know I've never read that book myself, but I was reading on your website, because I have a couple of your books, but this is one of the ones I haven't read. What exactly is a body snatcher?
Well, basically, the theme of the book is about Roswell. Now, of course, everybody knows the Roswell story. What we know for certain is that something crashed in the deserts outside of Roswell, New Mexico, in July 1947, that was subject to a very large-scale military cover-up, and we know for certain that the military changed its story several times as to what had crashed and what was recovered. Now, we have the UFO angle and the alien bodies angle. The government initially said it was a flying saucer, then they said it was a weather balloon, and today they say it was a mogul balloon. A mogul balloon was basically like a large array of conventional balloons designed to monitor Soviet atomic bomb detonations in the atmosphere. And initially, I should say in the 1990s, in the early 90s, the Air Force said that there were no grounds for believing any sort of bodies were found at the crash site. Then in 97 they changed their story and said that the legends of the bodies were related to high altitude experiments using crash test dummies. So in other words, we have this weird scenario with the government changing its story, and then we have the UFO angle. Well, between about 1996 and I think it was 2004, the book was published in 2005, so it was 2004, I spoke with about 7 or 8 old-timers from the US military who said that what they had been told, at least, and again, I stress this in the book, I could only relate what they told me and what they said they'd been told, was that they weren't, as I stressed, they weren't at the crash site. But they had been told that the UFO angle had been a cover-up for high-altitude experiments, high-altitude balloon experiments, utilizing Japanese prisoners of war, because there wasn't really too much known about high-altitude exposure to the human body back in 1947, and they wanted answers. And so they instigated, I guess, 3 or 4 semi-illegal experiments using prisoners that went drastically wrong when the balloons crashed. And in a worst-case scenario, in one instance, a rancher got to the crash site before the military, and it had been on the ground, for a day or so while the military were looking for it. And in that 24 hours, in the July heat, the balloon had shredded, the bodies had begun to decompose, and the rancher was just sort of shocked by what he'd found. And I was told that they'd hidden this controversial experiment under the cover of like a UFO banner to keep people off the track of arguably what might be a more controversial story. Now, I fully admit that, as I've always admitted, that I can never prove or disprove that I was outright lied to by these people to hide the fact that aliens really did crash. I've never denied that. All I tried to do with the book was to put the story out there as it was told to me. And if people ask me, do I think that it is the answer, I cannot say it is the answer, because we have so many different theories for what happened. In addition to the Air Force's theory about a mogul balloon and the UFO angle, there is a number of witnesses have said that it was an early rocket crash with monkeys on board. There's a new book coming out next month called Roswell and the Reich, which talks about it being a classified vehicle, a military vehicle developed by the Nazis and then brought over at the end of the Second World War that was test flown and crashed. So in other words, we have numerous theories. Now, somewhere in all those theories, there has to be the truth. But the problem is how we find that truth and recognizing it and proving it when we actually find it. So basically, that was the book. It was looking at Roswell from an alternative to the UFO angle, but still with a deep conspiracy at its heart.
Do you ever get angry people or any strange feedback from people in that book?
Oh, yeah. Well, I don't so much today because, it was published 5 years ago now, so anyone who was probably wanting to read it, who was interested in Roswell, would have read it then. But, yeah, I can remember doing a couple of conferences and gigs in 2005, just after the book came out, where people came up to me and almost literally, accused me of being in the under the counter payment of like the Illuminati or something like that. I was kind of like the next worst thing to Osama bin Laden. How dare you say aliens didn't crash at Roswell? And I was like, well, hang on a minute, I'm not saying that. What I've done is to write a book saying what these elderly people in their late 70s and 80s told me, and I've put the story out to see where we can take it. But people thought that, I'd changed my approach and was saying that the UFO subject was all nonsense, which, I certainly wasn't doing, because I do believe there's a genuine UFO phenomenon. But if you're exposed to something and you're told a detailed story by verifiable military people, I don't see there's any problem putting the story out to share it, to see where we can take it. I think the responsibility is on us not to hide information that doesn't sit comfortably, but we should share it to see if we can verify it or prove that it was, another level of disinformation to confuse what really happened at Roswell. So yeah, I got a lot of those sort of emotional, finger pointing responses. But that's how it goes. The UFO subject's an emotion-driven subject. It provokes a lot of emotion, and so you just have to deal with that when it happens. And I got thick skin. It's if people ask me a question, I'll answer them, and if they don't agree with me, then I'm happy to debate the merits or the lack of merits regarding my views or their views, etc.
Well, I had a couple questions on another book of yours on a similar topic. It's called Cosmic Crashes.
Mm.
In your book, I haven't read this one, but do you have anywhere in the book that talks about any alive alien sound or alien bodies?
Yeah, certainly alien bodies. Cosmic Crashes was written about probably 13 years ago, I think, and I think it was published like 11 years or 12 years ago, something like that. And it was basically kind of written in a similar fashion to my crypto books, in the sense it was like a road trip. What I basically did was to put aside like 3 months to investigating a whole range of crashed UFO claims, and travelled around interviewing people who had either had first-hand experience of these crashes, or their father or grandfather or grandmother knew something about them, or were in the military and were at the crash site, that sort of thing. And it's one of these things where I spoke to a lot of people who talked about the retrieval of dead bodies. I don't think I spoke to anyone for that book, at least, who talked about live beings found at the sites, the crash sites. But certainly there were a number of stories where people had spoken about body bags being brought in, and cryogenic storage units, and the military scrambling around to try and preserve these unique bodies. So it's kind of like a pattern that we've seen in a lot of these crash cases, that the military seems, in some cases, almost seems to have prior knowledge of where these events are going to occur, and can almost sort of preempt the crash, which in itself is sort of an interesting and a weird aspect of the story. But the military always seems to get there first and retrieves the bodies. And of course, there's a lot of stories as well about alien bodies being held in secure underground military installations, where they've been autopsied and then subsequently preserved, etc.
How many of the recovered crafts do you think that there are from the interviews and things that you've done?
Well, I mean, in terms of, actually, I'll give you a good answer to that. A friend of mine named Ryan Wood wrote a book called Magic Eyes Only a few years ago. And Ryan's book is probably the most extensive book on UFO crashes. And I think Ryan's book chronicles 74 stories. And I think since then he's found about another 10 or 15. So in terms of what we know publicly, we know that there are probably around about 80 or 90 accounts of crashes. Now, some of them are a little bit vague, where somebody would say, oh, my grandfather was involved in a crash site in New Mexico in the 40s, which could have been Roswell, but the person didn't remember it as Roswell. So there could be some overlap where one case, or where we think there could be two cases. It could be two people looking at different perspectives of the same case. But Ryan's book definitely talks about at least 70-something reports from going back 100 years or more, pretty much up to the present day.
Did anybody ever say where they thought they kept the bodies of the aliens that they drug off? Or? Yeah,
I mean, there's been several locations. One is from the 40s through the 70s, from the 40s through the early 80s, at an underground installation at a place called Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which is in Dayton, Ohio. And there have been legends about a place at the base called Hangar 18, but there never actually was a Hangar 18 at Wright-Patterson. It was just a legend. But the legend reported has been born out of the possibility that the beings or the bodies were kept underground at Wright-Patterson. Now, people have also, in more recent years, spoken about places like Area 51. But it's pretty much Area 51 and Wright-Patterson are the two that more than any other really stand out when people talk about, seeing these dead bodies in preserved storage, etc.
Well, another thing I was wondering was, do you believe the theory that we take technology from the crafts that we find, or?
Well, that's it's an interesting theory, and certainly there's a lot of witness reports to the idea that we have recovered crashed UFOs and we've been trying to understand the technology and replicate it. And, if we do have crashed UFOs, it would make a lot of sense that we're not just going to store them away and let them gather dust. We are going to want to try and determine how they work, how they fly, so we can replicate them and use them as a weapon or as a delivery system for weapons, to avoid enemy aircraft. So, I think the testimony and the reports are very interesting and it's logical. I think the only thing we don't have so far, is definitive proof in terms of, a knock-on metal craft that we can all go and see. But we do know that, the military, US military particularly, and the British military, and the Russians have over the years tried to build circular-shaped aircraft, and with varying degrees of success. So, we could argue that they got these ideas from somebody else.
Well, I'd like to comment on that really quickly. Mr. Redfern, I don't know if you're familiar with the Nazis trying to construct crafts like that. It's been a while since I've read or heard anything about this, but to my knowledge, they made these test sites with, and they would make these flying saucers, and experimented with them during around World War II, if my memory serves me right. Do you know anything really about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that the Nazis were, working on some very weird aircraft designs, and several of them were, circular in shape. And most military historians don't actually deny the fact that they were working on these designs. Where there's sort of discrepancies or disagreements is the extent to which these experiments were successful. Were they, or did they have the ability to fly these things at thousands of miles an hour, etc., or did they barely get off the ground and then just crash down in a heap again? And people seem to be divided between these two areas. But as I said, there is a new book coming out either this month or next month called Roswell and the Reich, and this actually deals with that very subject, the idea of advanced Nazi aircraft being built and one possibly coming down at Roswell. Now, again, of course, I haven't seen the book, so I don't know to what extent or what information the author has, but in terms of the story, I think that's going to be one to look out for people who are interested in the whole Nazi angle of the flying saucer mystery.
We have a caller from a 210 area code who's calling in. 210, you're on the air.
Yeah, this is the Boogeyman. How you doing?
Pretty good. You got a question for Nick?
Yeah, I was going to call things the guy beat me to it. During War II, okay, Germany was, I guess, heads and tails. They're really far ahead of everybody else as far as, I guess, weaponry and stuff, right? Yeah. No question about it. It's simple as that. There's no way you can deny that. At least 10 or 15 years, if not more. Do you think that they may have had some insight, let's say, into, possible, let's say, downed objects, where they may have come from? You know what I mean?
That's an interesting theory that, the idea that the Nazis didn't just develop this technology on their own. There are rumors that a genuine flying saucer, an extraterrestrial flying saucer, was recovered by the Nazis in the late 1930s, and that although they may not have fully understood the technology, the basic design was something that they could sort of duplicate, but, to a more rudimentary degree. And that's something that's been spoken about a lot, the idea that the Nazis may have realized that there was a genuine UFO phenomenon long before the rest of the world did. And of course, if they did recover a crashed UFO, a real one, that might explain why they were sort of leaps and bounds ahead of everybody else in the world of advanced technology, rocketry, and aircraft. So, yeah, I think that is a possibility.
But especially in those areas, like you say, the rocketry stuff, those areas, they seem to be a little more advanced than everyone else. But they were more advanced in there, other different ways, okay, like tank and stuff, but they just had ballistic missiles, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
way back then. Yeah. So, but those, if you notice that area, in my opinion, seemed to be way more advanced than everybody else. So, if you notice that, I've always wondered that myself.
Yeah.
How this one area, and the world was so much more advanced than anybody else in that area. I mean, I've always been curious about that, why that reason was. And
yeah, I mean, it was actually, I guess, down to a lot of luck that Germany actually didn't win the war. They were that advanced, and they took over most of Europe. And the only reason Britain didn't win was
very lucky.
Yeah.
It was very lucky they went on both fronts, okay? That was beyond luck for the Allies. Okay, the different. I'm a real big top on this area. Okay, and they got so lucky so many times. Okay, that or just bad moves. Okay, by him and stuff. That really it could have gone. Well, as far as Europe in that part, they would have definitely. But I don't know about let's say crossing the Atlantic type thing. But yeah, I've always wondered that myself. How you got Germany itself, and they've got all these ballistic missiles, all these type things in airplanes, jets, all those things so far ahead of everybody else at that particular time. Something they got it from somewhere eventually. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. Yeah, however you look at it, there's no doubt that they were working on things that the Allies had no real conception of, and we do have to ask the question: what would sort of prompt them to build flying saucer type vehicles? And if they'd recovered a real one, then that answers the question. So.
Stealth technology came out of Germany World War II.
Yeah, yeah.
So I mean, you wonder how would they so advance, and also. So many things too, It was, as far as that type area, it wasn't just missiles. I mean, they were coming out with more stuff all the time.
Yeah, they were working on early helicopters and rockets.
Atomic bomb, yeah.
They were even working on like an atomic bomb that if the war continued, they could fly a rocket from Germany to New York with an atomic bomb on, and so they were
working on that.
Yeah.
They were working on something where, I mean, they were very close if they actually didn't develop stuff like that, to actually having an atomic bomb.
No, yeah.
So it would, if they didn't have it, it was only a matter of time.
Yeah,
but
they would have
the Allies got so lucky so many times, I mean, with the different, situations that happened.
Yeah.
But, but I want to take your show. But it's like, but I've always wondered that myself. How did they get so leaps and bounds ahead? I'm sure some of the science that, but I'm trying to say, they were so, like you say, people hadn't conceived stuff like that, I don't think, or, maybe comic book type stuff. And these guys were actually doing it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, you're right.
And if you notice also, the first thing, that the Allies went to Germany was their scientists, right?
Yeah, that's right. They brought them all over, yeah.
They took them all out. They went after them, and they forget everything they did. And who's the guy that ran the NASA program, right? Who was the guy? He was the guy who was they wiped his slate clean.
Yeah.
and then also the Russians grabbed people too. Everybody took people.
Yeah, everybody wanted the technology and the people.
Exactly, because they knew something that they didn't know. They wanted it. But yeah, I've always wondered that. Like I said, Von Braun, what happened to him? NASA, right?
Yeah, he became a big
or a big part of it. But yeah, I've always wondered that myself. How they came to be so much more advanced than anybody else in these different areas. Just.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for your question, Boogeyman.
No, thanks.
Yeah, I have a question. A while back, you talked about the body snatcher thing, right?
Yeah.
I kind of kept telling them, what was the theory on that?
Well, basically, it was the idea, again, of like a military experiment but hidden underneath like a UFO cover story. But again, it comes back to which came first, sort of, the military experiments or real UFOs. It's sort of just like a similar thing along those lines, the idea that some sort of advanced military vehicle crashed in the desert and that was based on World War II designs. And then the military, covered it up and started spreading stories about UFOs if people came looking. So, it's a controversial theory, but, I think the problem with Roswell is it's so long ago, it's actually getting proof of what happened, when pretty much everybody's dead and the government's saying nothing, basically. So.
Yeah, it's one of the situations, you're right.
Yeah.
You're dead on, like you say, after people die, you can't do nothing about it, right?
Yep, that's right.
No witnesses, it's all over.
Yeah, when the witnesses are all gone, that's when the government will breathe a sigh of relief, because as long as it doesn't release the files, the government knows its position's safe when everybody's gone. So
they can destroy the files anytime they want.
Yeah, they can just shred them if they wanted.
Yeah, whatever they want to do. Yeah, that's no problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I was calling because you got a really show here and a definitely interesting subject that I've always dabbled in, let's say. wondered about.
Oh, thanks for your question, Boogeyman.
All right, thanks.
Let's talk. Bye.
And we have a 918, Becky.
Yeah, that's me.
Did you have a question for Nick?
I don't have a specific question at the moment. I mean, I'm reading his books right now. I read Memoirs of a Monster Hunter last year, and I'm going back and reading Three Men Seeking Monsters right now. And then I'm going to be reading There's Something in the Woods. But they're really good books. They're really interesting. They're really entertaining.
Oh, well, thanks, Becky.
Yeah, I really enjoyed them. Something I would like to comment on, though, is when you talk about psychic backlash.
Yes.
Like when weird incidents happen and bad stuff, are you still experiencing stuff like that? I guess that's a question I have.
That's a good question. I mean, for people who aren't aware of psychic backlash, basically what it is that there are numerous examples in different aspects of paranormal investigations where people will investigate something, and this primarily relates to some of the cases that are clearly paranormal linked, but where the person investigates it, and then it's almost like the phenomenon gets its grips into them, and I guess like commits like a psychic assault on them, and they begin to experience a whole range of bad luck in their lives. Just everything goes wrong over a period of time, to the point where people often just leave the subject behind. They feel something's got its grips into them, and the only way to get away from it is to get away from it. Now, personally, I haven't had that experience for a while, although I did have it, on several occasions, but it seems to be something that goes through the lives of a lot of researchers at some point or another, that you touch upon something that's genuinely sort of weird and, I guess, evil in some respects. And that it can actually, the more you delve into it, and particularly what I've found is that the way to avoid it happening is that, you kind of have a life away from the subject, and you don't get too darkly and deeply involved where you become obsessed. And I think because if you become obsessed with it, it can get its grips into you. And
so it kind of takes over, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And when it starts to take over, then it's almost like, the train's going down the track and there's no stopping it. And I've found that if you kind of balance the research with having a normal life as well, it's almost like it doesn't have that strong magnetic pull on you. But there are a lot of people who, have spoken about this so-called psychic backlash, where they've just literally burned their files, I mean literally, and said, I'm not getting into this anymore. They felt sort of like evil presences in the house, computers blowing up, and, electrical equipment all through the house just going wrong, just runs and runs of bad luck, etc., to where they pinpointed it to when they got deeper and deeper into these investigations. And it's sort of a disturbing aspect that that does sort of put a lot of people off. But as I said, there are ways against it, and people often also use rituals when they feel that's the only way to sort of get rid of it as well. The idea of like a cleansing ritual or something like that in the home or wherever.
Yeah.
So it's something where I say to people, if you're interested in doing investigations like these by all means do them, but just sometimes be aware that there are hazards involved as well, of the type that you don't necessarily think are going to come along. So.
We have about 15 minutes left in the show, and I was going to ask a couple questions about just random things. Yeah, we have a bunch of people that are asking us, have you ever been approached or threatened by any government officials or MIB or anybody for looking at...
No, I actually wrote a book about the Men in Black once called On the Trail of the Saucer Spies, which is a whole history of how people in the UFO subject have been secretly watched by the government and the Men in Black. But no, I've never had a run-in where somebody, has knocked on the front door in a black suit and said, you will not talk about this. And I mean, if it happened, I think what I'd probably do is I'd put the story in the next book. So it'd be kind of like it'd be kind of counterproductive. And I think actually what happens is that these sort of attempts to silence people happen where they probably do like a character assessment of the person. And if someone's kind of like a nervous person, that sort of approach probably is going to work. It would threaten me to silence. But as I said, it probably wouldn't. I wouldn't feel intimidated. I'd feel more like, wow, this is something I need to tell people. So it's probably unlikely that they'd come banging on my door. But in saying that, you know, when I was doing the research for the On the Trail of the Sources Files book, you know, I uncovered a lot of cases which lead me to believe, you know, that Men in Black, whoever they are and wherever they're from, they're a very real phenomenon. You know, they're not just a figment of people's imagination or sort of cultural mythology, that there really are sort of sinister people going around, you know, silencing people and threatening them, etc.
Another question I was wondering was, what book, in your stance, do you feel is your greatest accomplishment?
Well, I don't know if I'd say greatest. I mean, you know, I'm just writing paranormal. I don't want to sort of sound like some egotistical monster saying, "Oh, it's great, my greatest book." It's, you know, I'm writing sort of paranormal stuff. I don't want to sort of get carried away. But, you know, I mean, I think what I've tried to do with all the books is sort of, you know, write varied books. I mean, I think I've done about 16 books altogether, probably 5 or 6 on cryptozoology, 5 or 6 on UFOs, 1 on Hollywood scandal, couple on conspiracies and things like that. So what I try and do is sort of keep the books varied and not repeat what I write about. And I think, you know, it's important not to cheat the reader in terms of what you're writing about. You know, I would never write, for example, like 50 greatest alien abduction stories and just, you know, pull stories from other people's books and just repeat them when everybody's read them in everybody else's books. You know, that's cheating the reader. So what I try and do is always, whatever the subject matter, I always try and come up with or present all the new information that I've found or the new investigations that I've done, and hopefully bring something new to the table. But I think actually, you know, the latest book, Contactees, I like that one because what I tried to do with that one, I realised that a lot of people who were new to the subject, particularly in the last 10, 15 years, weren't necessarily, through no fault of their own, they weren't fully aware of the very early years of the late 40s and 50s of the UFO subject. And I thought, you know, it'd be sort of a good time to bring this to a new audience and show them some of the stuff from the earlier years. But also, you know, I like the, you know, writing about the road trip angle of the crypto stuff because, you know, it's fun. You know, it's a good time traveling around. Yeah, you know, it's fun traveling around, investigating sightings of weird creatures, and, you know, it's the adventure excitement, and, you know, have a good time and a laugh doing it as well. So when you're writing it, you know, you kind of puts a smile on your face when you think back to everything that happens. So, you know, I guess it's difficult to pinpoint one book, but, you know, I always try, you know, my best to present something that I hope will entertain and inform people as well.
Another thing that, similar to that, I would like to ask you is, would you say you like, what was your favorite thing to study? Would you say like cryptids or alien-related things? Or?
Oh, yeah, I'd definitely say the cryptozoology because, you know, I'm probably one of these people who gets sort of a bit skittish just sitting, you know, in an office all day long. And, you know, I enjoy getting on the road and doing investigations. And, of course, cryptozoology is something that sort of really lends itself to, you know, going out in the woods, camping out, trekking up the hills, etc., or, you know, hanging out on the shore of a big lake for 3 or 4 days. And I, you know, as well as the potential for finding something, you know, I enjoy that sort of lifestyle of traveling around and hitting the roads.
Well, another good thing that I was wondering was, I haven't read any material that you've written about ghosts. I was wondering, do you have any ghost books or plan on writing anything on ghosts or anything like that? Or?
Not really. That's actually a question I often get asked, you know, have I written about ghosts? And I really haven't. The main reason being that, you know, I feel that the two areas that I'm sort of have a bigger understanding of and you know, more I'm sort of widely known for is cryptozoology and UFOs. Now, you know, again, there's a lot of good, credible people out there who are very specialised in the, you know, the ghost hunting community, and they're sort of far more informed on the subject than I am, or in fact ever could be, I think. You know, I've never really delved into that area, not because I don't believe it's a valid area of research. I do. I think there's a genuine phenomenon or phenomena. But again, for me to sort of go blundering in with no background and have to sort of basically tread on the toes of people who are doing all this for years and years. I feel it's more suitable for me to sort of focus on the areas that I am very knowledgeable on, and then let the ghost hunters do their thing. And I think that's a better way of doing it. We're likely to get more answers when we have people, more knowledgeable in different areas rather than me just trying to, jump on their coattails, so to speak.
A good question that I was getting asked a lot. How often would you say that you actually get scared on your monster hunting?
I wouldn't actually say I've ever been scared as such. I would think it's more of like, you get that adrenaline rush. It's like the whole fight or flight thing that people talk about. Some people, they run, others, it kind of pumps you up. And that's sort of how it does it with me. I think, if I go out in the woods, and as has happened actually on a few occasions, not a lot, but occasionally, there have been some very weird things where I've seen sort of like shadowy, almost like ape-like forms in the woods and things like that, or glowing eyes, or just hearing a really weird, loud animalistic scream, which obviously isn't, like a regular animal. That's happened not a lot, but 4 or 5 times maybe over the course of 15, 16 years. And when you get that, you do get kind of that chill go through you, but also you get the feeling of, wow, I've got to press on because this could be it, So I don't really get frightened as such, but I do get kind of that adrenaline pumping and, wanting to take it further. So.
Well, is there any books? I know you said you're currently writing a book. Is there any? What was your book about that you're writing right now?
Well, actually, I've been cranking them out just recently. I've got 3 books coming out over the next 3 months. One is co-written with a friend of mine who lives in San Antonio. I live in Dallas, so we're both in Texas, and the book's called Monsters of Texas. And this is basically a study of weird creatures in Texas, everything from chupacabra reports to Bigfoot to lake monsters to werewolves, and it's sort of, just a regional look at the mystery animals of Texas. That should be hopefully published in probably about 7 weeks, and I've done a book called Mystery Animals of Staffordshire. Staffordshire is a county in England where I grew up, so that's a regional British study of strange animals. And I also have this book called Final Events, which is coming out hopefully in about 6 or 7 weeks from Anomalist Books over here in the US. And this is a study of a group in the US government that investigated the UFO subject and felt that it had paranormal rather than alien origins, and that it was like an occult mystery masquerading as an alien one. And again, it's a controversial story, but the fact that these are retired in some cases and still serving military people in others, it makes it an interesting story that people in the government have come to this conclusion. So I've got those 3 coming out shortly. Then I've got to find the next one, I guess. So.
And also, I was going to say, your website said you've been on some TV shows. I was just wondering, is there any of those that are coming up anytime soon?
Actually, I was on 2 just recently. One on the History Channel's Monster Quest series. I was on there about 2 weeks ago on an episode they filmed about Mothman. And they rerun these episodes quite often. So if you go to the History Channel and see the Mothman episode, you'll see me on there. I was filmed about 3 months ago in Wisconsin, where there'd been some Mothman-type reports. And so they had me trekking around the woods and mountains of Wisconsin looking for this equivalent of Mothman. So, so if you check the listings. And I was also on a new series on the National Geographic Channel, not Monday just gone, but the Monday before, about the chupacabra. And this show's called Paranatural. And I think that's repeated at some point over the next few days. Part of it's actually on YouTube, I think. You can see part of the show there, but it's called Paranatural, and if you type in Paranatural plus Chupacabra, you'll find at least a little bit of the footage of me. So, I filmed another Paranatural episode about UFOs, got weird ghostly lights in the sky that they were investigating, and I often do sort of TV. I've done History Channel and sort of Sci-Fi Channel programs like Proof Positive.
Is that ever going to be on TV? Because I said in the book, didn't you say that it hasn't been aired on TV yet, the Proof Positive one? Or has it?
The Proof Positive one was, yeah, that was the trip to Puerto Rico I made. But there was one I did, which was called Exops, which was like a ghost hunting one, actually in Roswell. And that one has never aired. Whether it will, I don't know. But, I mean, that was a good one. I enjoyed doing that one. It was sort of looking at the fact that it was going to Roswell, but it was putting a different spin on the Roswell story because people were talking at the old military base where supposedly these bodies were taken from the Roswell crash. They were talking about seeing like spectral, ghostly figures in the old hospital and the old military base. So that the theory was that it was like the ghosts of the aliens still stranded at the old military base. So we did kind of like a seance in one of the old military hangars, and you know, it was an interesting investigation, but for whatever reason it was never broadcast, and you know, I just don't know if it ever will be now. So.
We have about 3 minutes left in the show, and I just had one quick question before we have to start ending the show. Where would you say would be a good place to start looking for the Mothman if you were to do like a nowadays investigation, like outside of Point Pleasant?
Well, yeah, I mean, Point Pleasant's the place where everybody thinks about. The problem is, of course, you know, it's like Roswell. It was where Point Pleasant is where the original event occurred. Now, there are still occasional reports from the area, but, you know, if you ask me, do I think Point Pleasant's the best place to go to see it today? No, I actually don't. The problem is it's very difficult to sort of predict where these creatures or beings are going to surface. Now, as I said, I did an episode for Monster Quest recently, and this was related to some sightings of a very similar creature seen in Wisconsin. You know, there's also reports I mentioned of large winged creatures, bat-like creatures down on the Texas-Mexico border. Also from Oregon, there are a number of reports. So, unfortunately, you know, it seems like they come and go. There hasn't, other than the Mothman reports of the 60s, there hasn't really been one location where they've been sort of static in one area for a lengthy period. So it's, you know, it is really hard to predict where they might turn up. You know, that's what makes it difficult tracking them down, I guess.
But we have 2 minutes left in the show. I was going to see if you wanted to announce anything about any of your websites or where people could reach you to buy any of your books or anything like that.
Yeah, sure. My website is nickredfern.com, which is NICKREDFERN. And people can find out about the books there. They can email me from the site. And I also have a lot of different blogs, as I mentioned earlier, which are all linked at the site. I have like a Bigfoot blog, a cryptozoology blog, a UFO blog, a Roswell blog, Hollywood scandal blog. I have all sorts of blogs on different things, but if people don't have to search the net for them, they can just click on the blog section at the website and it'll take people to all the relevant ones. And I try and update most of them daily if I can with all the latest news and interviews and, you know, latest discoveries in the relevant fields. So.
Well, thank you for doing an interview with us. Hope to hear from you again soon.
All right,
and I'll let Becky and my co-host say their goodbyes.
All right. Well, thanks, Becky, for the questions, and hope you continue to enjoy the books. So,
I'm sure I will.
I'll definitely pick some books up too.
All right.
Thanks for talking.
All right. Well, thanks for having me on the show, guys. And if you ever want me back on, just let me know, and I'll be quite happy to come on.
All right. Thank you.
All right. See you later.
I'm going to email you in just a second.
All right.
All right.
See you later. Bye-bye.